Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive Emerald City Hockey Seattle Kraken podcast. RJ, it's been a pretty good week for the Seattle Kraken here, 4-2 on the year, playing great hockey, finding different ways to win. We're going to get into all that good stuff a little bit later on, as well as the little bit of news that we do have around the team. We'll talk about that, but of course we got to start by thanking our wonderful sponsor, Queen Anne Beer Hall, and I know you have more on them.
I do, and it's good timing because, of course, as we record this, it is Monday, and that means Monday Night Football coming up tonight at Queen Anne Beer Hall. There's two Monday night games, too. It's Ravens, Bucks, and Cardinals, Chargers. Now, whether you, like Dylan, are rooting for Baker Mayfield to lead your fantasy team to an unlikely come-from-behind win, or like me, if you're rooting for Trey McBride to just pad the stats in a game you've already won, either way, you can take advantage of the deals for Monday Night Football at Queen Anne Beer Hall. $8 smash burger and fries all throughout the games, and lots of food options for you too. $8 for that giant pretzel that Dylan and I love so much. $8 for the smash burger with fries, 6 wings for $8, or stadium dog with fries, only $5. So some really good deals there. And of course, all the different beer options that you could want, lots of drink options as well. So great place for Monday Night Football, no matter what your rooting interest is.
I was gonna say I do have Derrick Henry too. It's still unlikely, but I get to watch. I get to watch him too. But yeah, it's unlikely. I was gonna say maybe that's actually not bad because I do want to watch that game tonight. Maybe I'll go and I can drown my sorrows in buffalo wings.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a bad idea.
Yeah, buffalo wings. I know you're not gonna be able to resist that pretzel though.
No. That's.
I guess that's
dessert.
a given. You didn't even mention it because that's a given.
Well, I like to eat protein and then follow it up with some form of carb. That's my style, and so I could do that. Get the wings and then go with the pretzel. It's a good system. Okay, the other thing that we want to quickly mention before we get into the podcast here is that I have my upcoming prospect chat over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey coming up. That is this Wednesday on the 23rd. Yes, it is at 7:00. So excited to kind of do the first prospect chat of the season here with everybody. Kind of, they're all back on their teams. Last one we did was, the kind of training camp wrap up and rookie camp wrap up, but excited to talk about the guys and how they've been performing down in CV. Some interesting early results from some people down there. Point per game player, Edward Chalet. Point per game player, Jagger Furcus. Just saying. So good stuff to talk about there over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey coming up this Wednesday at 7:00 for that prospect chat. So wanted to mention that as well. RJ, we'll get into the big news item. I think the biggest news item really for Kraken fans right now, and that is the status on Vince Dunn.
That's right. So Vince Dunn, unfortunately, has had some rough injury luck to start the season. He was dealing with something after a hit that he took in one of the earlier games too. It was an upper body injury, and now it seems like a separate, unrelated injury now from an awkward fall that he took in the Philadelphia game. And so no new update on that today, but Dan Bilesma yesterday was saying that he is out day-to-day with a mid-body injury, which is actually a newer designation. Usually we'll get upper body or lower body, but the rare mid-body injury for Vince Dunn, I've seen some jokes online about just various things that could be, but it makes sense to me because if you look at the clip of the awkward fall, we put it up on the social media so you can go see it on Twitter. It's from a few days ago during the Philly game. He, I guess, kind of reaches up for a puck and falls backwards and really lands on his lower back. He lands just pretty solidly lower back to ice. And as we both know, Dylan, there's not a lot of padding there.
Right.
If it's above your pants, below where the shoulder pads end, there's not a lot of padding there. And so that can be a rough landing if you land on it wrong. Not saying we know for sure that's what it is, but that feels like it would track for a mid-body injury.
It would. And the other thing is also, right, like there's the element of the landing. It's also kind of the way he twists as he goes down could tweak something in that area, right? So that's what I had originally thought, was that you maybe tweak something. As somebody with lower back issues from time to time, I was like, oh, that would definitely tweak my lower back and cause it to flare up. So just the way his hips kind of slide out at an angle from it. So yeah, it's all speculation on our part, of course, but that seems to kind of be the direction it's going in.
Yeah, I think if that happened to you, you wouldn't be able to even get out of bed to record this, I imagine, or to either of us, really. That's
it would require a lot of ibuprofen, a lot of heat. That's for sure.
Yeah. But the result is Vince Dunn missed the last game against Calgary. No word on if he's going to play tomorrow against Colorado. I just personal feel for it. I would imagine it's unlikely. I think it'd be a quick return for him. But that gets into some questions too of just how big of an impact does this have on the team? I think people have brought up plenty over the last couple of years, right? The stats and the splits with Dunn and without Vince Dunn. He's clearly a very important player on that blue line. Like, what's our level of worry with yet another Vince Dunn injury this early in the season?
I'm hoping I saved it off of Discord because we had the right. Exact calculated splits of with Vince Dunn and without Vince Dunn. Oh, I don't see it here, but it was about was it an expected goal or an actual goal for almost a
it was an actual goal for,
yeah, almost a full goal higher for the Kraken offense with Vince Dunn out there. In the games Vince Dunn has played, they score on average a whole goal more than they do when he is not out there, which that's substantial. I don't know that anybody else on this team would have that level of impact. But of course, if you've been following the Kraken these last couple of years, you know that he has been that important to this club. I think the addition of Brandon Montour has helped ease some of that. And we've seen that in the couple games that Vince has had to miss this season. But it's still, to have both of them out there would be a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think Montour has stepped up a ton, and we can talk about that later in the podcast too, about just the impact he's continuing to have. But it is a worrying thing long-term to have to play without Vince Dunn, because as well as this team has been coached, as well as they're playing so far right now, I think a lot of nights, maybe not so far this season, you've had Philly, you've had Calgary, but especially coming up, you might be at a skill disadvantage compared to some of these other teams like Colorado, Winnipeg, Carolina, just to name the next three that are coming up in the rest of this homestand. You're going to need all the skill that you can get, and Vince Dunn is a big part of that.
Yeah, and credit to Via Ren for the Discord the doing of the numbers that was posted to Discord there.
Speaking of Discord, though, and people pointing things out, I do want to give credit to Zoe here for pointing out what may be the biggest tragedy of all of this is that Vince Dunn, should he not be ready tomorrow, would miss his bobblehead game.
I know.
That would be sad.
It would be. It's always tough. Excited that it's the first bobblehead game of the new season, all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, it is kind of it's unfortunate that this is happening at the same time.
Yeah. If you do want to find a silver lining, though, I think Matty Beniers, right? He was injured for his bobblehead game, and they did win the game.
Yes.
So there is that, and he was able to return pretty shortly afterward.
Right. Yeah. No.
So let's hope for more of the same here.
I think we can. Let's see here. So that's yeah. We'll get into, I guess, maybe more so the differences of having Dunn out of the lineup in a little bit when we break down the games. I guess the other news item that was just kind of fun from today was just that the Kraken had their team Halloween party last night, and just hearing some of the guys talk about that was fun. And it was just it had, I don't know for sure, because I haven't necessarily been like around in the locker room and stuff for previous Halloween parties, but it just feels like as the locker room has gotten a couple games under their belt, as it's been a couple months now with Dan being in place and the new energy and vibe around everything, it felt like everybody had like a good time, and it was like a really good, just kind of relax, hang out with the boys, kind of atmosphere. And it feels like everything is just kind of going well for everybody in the room. And so I just kind of want to let everybody know that.
Yeah, and it's something that we don't talk about a whole lot right now, because I feel like we saw it coming a little bit, whether it was through training camp or the preseason, right? It was just so clear that the vibes were a lot better. And that hasn't changed as the season started.
No.
But, normally we would do a whole segment, right, about how the vibes are good, everyone's enjoying practice. I mean, there's 10 or so moments from just the last couple of practices you could point out where the guys are clearly having, I'd say, a better time than they were having at the end of last season. Things are fun again. And it just feels like old news almost at this point, which I guess is good, right?
Yeah.
That it just feels like, of course, this is just how things are and how they're supposed to be. But yeah, the Halloween stuff was really fun today. We all first took notice of it because Andre Burakovsky was at practice sporting what looked like some new face
Face
tattoos
and
all
neck
around
tats. Yeah.
his face and neck tats. Yeah, he had a little like cross on his cheek. He had I think a pentagram on his
It
neck.
looked like it, yeah.
It's like, oh, what, we have an interesting weekend there. But we figured it was probably for a Halloween costume. He did confirm that those were temporary tattoos that were kind of washing off or on their way to washing off
Yeah.
from a Halloween costume. So I thought that was kind of funny. And then hearing some stories from him or Jared McCann too about the party and how it went. And, that Jaden Schwartz hosted it because he's got the big house to host everybody. I loved how all the Firebirds guys went as the Flint Tropics basketball team, and so that was a cool group costume there, and you love seeing the camaraderie with the Firebirds guys all still sticking together at the NHL level. And then Berkey saying his favorite costume was Brandon Tanev, who went as Professor Snape because they have the same haircut.
They do.
So I love that.
That is very much a Snape haircut. Do you think Turbo goes to his barber or whatever and just says, "Give me the Snape"?
I could see that. Just give me this thing. I think our photographer Jen had made that reference in a post at some point last season.
Yeah.
Right, had made a Harry Potter joke, and you always wondered to the player, like, do they know about that? Do they make those jokes? But no, clearly he's aware of it.
Yeah, no, it was just good. Like I said, it's just nice for everybody in the room to just be feeling good. I know they're winning right now, so like everything is positive from that, but it does feel like a different atmosphere from last season. And McCann talked a little bit about that today, even just, the vibe and the mood and everything and the way guys are feeling about showing up and going to the games and playing the games and all of that kind of stuff is different from last year. So that's I think just a healthy way to kind of transition over into talking about how they've been playing, RJ, because it is a lot different than last year and it's been a lot better. And you can tell that the guys are having more fun out there, I feel like, right? Now, obviously on nights where you're able to put up big goal totals helps, right? You go from a 7-goal game to a 6-goal game, like that kind of thing is going to help you. But even in this last game against Calgary, where you only win it 2-1 and it's kind of a hard fought battle, the group had a different vibe to it out there on the ice. You can kind of tell. And then obviously you get the big joyous celebration at the end. You get Joey trying to jump on the pile, all that kind of stuff. But it does very much feel like the changes made to the culture have kind of taken root now. And it's kind of given them a solid base to work off of.
Right. You're seeing the team play the way that they've been practicing and trying to have it come together. And honestly, that 2-1 win, even though it's maybe a little less fun for some of the guys, particularly maybe the forwards, when you're getting 6-7 goals, I'd rather see them. I wanted to see them win that way too, because they didn't really have a win that looked like that. They all came when they scored 5+ goals. And to show that you can win a game like that, especially one where you don't have Vince Dunn in the lineup, because as we saw from those numbers, right, not having him in the lineup is going to kill your goal scoring production. Apparently that's just what it is. But being able to gut out a game like that, where it's also more of a game of chance, right? It's about taking advantage of certain moments. Dan Bilesma talked a lot about this. In a game like that, it's about identifying those key moments where the game can turn on a dime, right? And making the most of them. And you saw that with the 5-on-3 that they had. Dan takes a timeout and Jess Campbell gets out the whiteboard, draws something up, and they're able to execute just like it was drawn up. By the way, this morning at practice, Jess got some stick taps. I imagine that's what it was for, but at the start of practice, we kind of saw some stick taps for Jess there. So that was pretty cool to see. But yeah, 3 wins. They come in different types of ways, but this team is finding ways to win, as opposed to last year's team that really felt like they were finding ways to lose.
Yeah. I was gonna say I didn't realize we were gonna dive right into all the breakdown stuff from.
Sorry, I got ahead of myself there. My bad.
Yeah. I was gonna say, let's read. What, are you steal all my notes here? All right. It's we can do that though, because I think the last game was important for a lot of reasons. And so I'm okay kind of starting there and building off what you were talking about. I'd said it on the post game, right when it had ended, was it's important that this team could show us that they can win a game like this, and it's important for them to know that they can win a game like this. That's going to be their lowest event game of the season, as Dan pointed out today, that it's going to be a game that is a little bit more of a slog. It's going to be against a more physical opponent, a bigger opponent, a team that's going to try to put all of their efforts into stopping what's working for you. And that was really the thing that stood out to me from the Calgary game. Was that was a Calgary team that in all three zones, all Calgary was trying to do, what their game plan was to stop what the Kraken were doing well in each of those three zones. Whether it was, we're going to go hard and heavy on a forecheck in Calgary's offensive zone, in the Kraken's defensive zone, they were not going to give their defensemen or the wingers a lot of time and space to make those outlet passes that the Kraken have been using to kind of turn games into track meets, right? They were not going to let the Kraken dictate the pace of play in this one by going heavy on a forecheck there, by swarming in the neutral zone to make sure that guys couldn't make those kind of cross neutral zone passes that they've been able to make to kind of put defenses back on their heels. The Kraken weren't really able to do that in this one because Calgary was so focused on stopping it. And then when the Kraken were in the offensive zone, Calgary were like, hey, you guys want to go net front? You can't now, because we're just going to kind of collapse in. We're going to try to take away the slot as much as possible, push you to the perimeter, and, beat us that way if you can. And it did work, right? Like it bottled up the Kraken in a way we haven't really seen the Kraken bottled up before, right? Dallas did in their shutout win, but it was done a little bit differently. And it also felt like some of that was just because the Kraken were, coming off the back-to-back games there, the second half of that. This one, it felt like it was the first time that a team was like, okay, we've got some solid tape now on this Kraken group. We're seeing how they're playing this year under the new head coach. This is what we're going to do to stop it. And in some ways, they were able to slow it down, but I think the Kraken were still able to generate chances and still able to dictate enough of that game. And I think I see it kind of more so, RJ, as this is a little bit of a badge of honor that another team just had to they completely had to game plan for you in all three zones, right? Like Calgary did nothing themselves. Even though this was a 4-0 team coming into that game, they had guys that were putting up numbers. Calgary did absolutely nothing because the entire game, their whole 60-minute effort was just, we're not going to let them beat us. And that's just such a new thing, it feels like, for the Kraken, RJ, where another team is going to give up their game to stop yours. Like, I think that's a good sign that this is how NHL clubs are starting to view this team based on how they're playing in this new system. Like, the NHL has taken note.
And is that not exactly what Dan said as far as his goals at the start of the season, right? He said he wanted to establish an identity to the point where other teams come in to play us, they're thinking this is Seattle Kraken hockey, and they have to think about the way that we play. I should almost go pull up the quote right from
idea.
him. But that sounds like exactly what he said at the start of the season about establishing an identity, and we're seeing it come together.
Right. And I think that's huge. And I think it's an interesting glimpse into what coaches view as important and what organizations see when they're looking at each other. Because really, yes, there's been the added goal scoring this year from this group. But really, the thing that has made them different in the way that they're playing games is the way that they're dictating pace, the way that they're controlling games. And I think this gives a nice kind of insight into the way these organizations and coaches view things of what's important. Well, what's important is being able to play your game, controlling the pace of a game, controlling the game, really, right? And that's obviously what's important, because that's what the other teams now apparently are going to want to stop for the Kraken. It's what Dan wanted to bring to this team and have those other teams worried about. And so I do think like that's been a kind of fascinating aspect in all this, is you're starting to see where coaching staffs place importance on the overall game. It isn't necessarily in the X's and O's of how you go out there with a certain system and crafting the perfect play and all of that kind of stuff. Like there are moments for that, like the power play. But for the most part, when you're looking at a game like hockey, that's a free-flowing game. It's not like football where you're going to be designing schemes and different looks and route patterns and all of that kind of stuff. In a sport like hockey, it's just about controlling as much of it as possible. And that's really what they're going for. And the Kraken have done such a good job of it that, again, you had an undefeated team come into Climate Pledge Arena, and the only thing that they could think about doing was just trying to stop the Kraken.
Yeah, and when you can put another team in that situation where they're just having to react, that's half the battle, I feel like, right? Now, there were ways they were able to kind of shut down what the Kraken were doing, and that's where you kind of want to make counter adjustments. You look at the
Yeah.
film. I think that Calgary game is going to be excellent as far as just having that on tape, having
Yes.
that whole game on tape, having Dan be able to go back and look at and kind of see how do you then circumvent these sort of things, because you're going to be facing teams, especially in the next week, that you maybe even have a little bit more ability to try and take your stuff away, but then also dictate the play themselves. Like I keep thinking at this Colorado game, and not to get ahead of myself again and look too far ahead, but you have this Colorado team that's an opponent, right? When McKinnon and Ronson on the ice, they're going to be dictating the play. You are going to have to worry about taking them away, right? And so they can kind of do both.
Right. And I think this is where like the depth that the Kraken have kind of comes in handy, because you can kind of commit resources into containing one line from another team, and then still having three lines that are capable of maybe doing something for you. But I when it comes to the counter adjustments, like that is still something that is in the, remains to be seen from this team and from the coaching staff. And I talked about it at the end of game 1 on the post-game live after the Blues game, right? The Blues in that game, they're able to take advantage of the momentum swing. They build a lead. The Kraken then enter a third period. They're down by 1. The Blues adjust, and they take away like the Kraken's ability to get to the inside, to get to the slot, to get net front in the offensive zone. And the Kraken didn't really have an answer for it. And it was kind of easy to say like, well, look, it's game 1. The Kraken are still focused on just kind of building the overall chemistry, finding their lines, doing all of that kind of stuff, getting used to the system, getting used to the trust between players there. And it was kind of easy to write that off. But this Calgary game kind of, again, brought it up of, if a team is going to take away your outlet passes, if they're going to take away your ability to move with speed through the neutral zone, if they're going to take away your ability to go net front and in the slot, what else do you have? And we still didn't really get a good answer from it, right? We've seen it now twice this season, or really 3 times, because also the Dallas game. And in all 3 times, the goals for the Kraken, they fall off pretty big time, right? And so that is going to be something that they need to work on. To go back to what I said after game 1, I know Dan and this coaching staff are capable of making counter adjustments. We know that. We've seen them do it in CV, all of that kind of stuff. I still think that it's something that they're going to think about and workshop and start game planning for, but it'll still come a little bit later, just because they're so focused on just getting all the things that they want to establish as their identity and all those good habits and all of that stuff down, right? Dan always saying that 20 games, right? I think we'll probably start to see counter adjustments before 20 games into the season, but I think, in the first 10, they might just be looking at building up that game tape and then kind of brainstorming things. And then after around 10 games, maybe that's when we start see them practicing different looks, start working different looks into games when teams do kind of come at them in this way.
Yeah, and we've talked about plan A and plan B as far as how you want to generate things. And I think, they're working on getting plan A down pat, getting that ready, memorized, second nature to everybody. And it seems like that's working so far too.
It is.
The number of times I've seen them just move the puck really quickly out of their own zone through the neutral zone to create odd man rushes. You even did see it in the Calgary game. They weren't able to convert on a lot of those, but just the amount of odd man rushes that they're having, 2-on-1s, 3-on-2s, from just moving the puck up ice really, really fast.
Mm-hmm.
And even it's just throwing it to an area. For those of you who watched the Dallas game, it was kind of what Edzo was talking about, how the Stars wanted to create offense and it was a newer wrinkle for them. You're seeing that every Kraken game now too. The way they can kind of lure the other team, especially if it's, you're in the D zone, lure them into kind of forechecking. But if you can get the puck out real quick, if they have 3 or 4 guys down low, just get it out. They have limited numbers back and you create a lot of chances. And I think you can get pretty far even with just that plan A, even though you are going to need plan B and C once that's taken away.
Yeah, exactly. And we're seeing it, just all over the place, right? You're seeing the depth and the scoring depth there from the Kraken, as every skater but Josh Mahura, who has only played 2 games, has a point already this season. That's phenomenal to see a lot of players on this team already with goals on the year. But I think the big thing, just to what you were specifically pointing out, that fast movement out of the defensive zone to kind of set things up. I look at the numbers for their puck moving defenseman, RJ. Right, Riker Evans, 4 points in 6 games this season. Brandon Montour, who's been incredible for the Kraken, 4 points in 6 games. Vince Dunn, 3 points in 4 games. You know he'd be up there with those other 2 guys. And then also Adam Larson, who is no stranger to stretch passes and the ability to kind of move the puck up the ice, and who I think fits this system a little bit better than what they were trying to do last year. 3 points in 6 games. The defensemen, they are working this. Like I think that transition has probably realistically been smoother than I thought it was going to be, as far as their ability to start creating these chances and having these defensemen kind of get to pucks, move it up the ice, have that transition go as smooth as it has. I think right now the place where if there's a hiccup in anything, it's in the neutral zone. But just to be able to kind of already have all 3 of your defensive pairs so on board and on point with this has been pretty incredible to see.
Which is kind of what they almost, in a way, communicated to us with the Brandon Montour signing, right?
Yeah.
We weren't thinking about defensemen going to this offseason, right? Doing our free agency preview, all that stuff. We weren't thinking defensemen. But once that signing was made, and I remember you turned to me and said, no, I kind of see the vision now, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to bring in a guy like that, when you already had a fairly decent blue line, right? This is the reason why. So you can have a puck mover when everyone's healthy on every single D pair, and somebody who can get that puck up quickly. And we're seeing the results of it. I think with Vince Dunn out, Brandon Montour is basically just being that puck mover on 2 lines worth of plays, right? Because he's playing so much, but he can do it.
Right. No, he can. He's been phenomenal. I mean, we just talk about him every post game. Everybody is just all about what Brandon Montour is doing for this club, and he is doing a lot. I also love the way, and this maybe is being done a little bit less by Riker, Vince Dunn, the other puck movers. And again, it's been tough because Vince Dunn, you could say, hasn't really been healthy this season. Brandon Montour, the way he'll just charge into an offensive zone, or if Alexiak or whoever he's out there on the ice with is moving the puck up out of the defensive zone, Brandon Montour is unafraid to join a rush. How many the kind of odd man rushes, RJ, or even if they're not an odd man rush, just how many rush chances have we seen where Brandon Montour is one of the first 2 Kraken into the offensive zone? That's, I think, also been really interesting to see, is just his ability to kind of read the situation on the other half of the ice. Okay, our guys just won that battle. They're going to be moving it up the ice. I'm just going to take off now, and I'll be able to join that rush and help my team get a chance.
Yeah, and with Montour, you know the book on him, right? He's got the skating, and everyone talks about how good the skating is, but until you see it in a game, and it's not just the technical aspects, right? It's what that allows you to do. If you have the instinct to go jump up, you can get there fast enough, and also know that you can get back if it doesn't go well. So that's just another element of his game. Honestly, we could spend every podcast every week just raving about Brandon Montour for 60 minutes. Yeah. I think at this point. So we'll try and, I guess, maybe just spread this out over the course of the season, right? Save some for next week. I'm sure we'll have more good things to say about him.
Yeah, no, he is clearly the model that they want their defensemen playing as, and so it makes it worth talking about there. And just like I said, how well these defensemen are all playing right now and fitting into the system, and how much they're helping drive offense. Which, again, that kind of full 200-foot game leaning to offense wasn't really something we saw from this group last year. It's not something that gets talked about too much in hockey in general, but I think this team is a great example of how offense can really start in the defensive zone, the way a lot of coaches do talk about it. I think Dan has been very good about talking about this stuff to us, allowing us to communicate this to the Kraken fans at large. And then these are all examples that you can watch each and every Kraken game, because they have such a specific game plan that they're going to stick to. You'll be able to kind of see this stuff, pick up on it, and go from there if you're a fan of this team. And I think that's really cool. Switching kind of gears, RJ, we talk about the defensemen and how they're kind of contributing to offense. We're still seeing it, right? We're still seeing guys go to the net, having success going to the net and doing that with this group. And we're seeing also the chemistry really start to build with some of these lines. And I know one of the things that we talked about this week was the idea that maybe this Shane Wright line with Jordan Eberle and Jared McCann is becoming the Kraken's first line. And I know Shane Wright's point totals aren't necessarily up there at the top of the team standings the way McCann and Eberle's are, but it does feel like something has happened there where that group has decided, like, we are going to be the group that focuses on offense. We're going to go out there. We really have a good feel for what we want to be doing offensively, and they're getting it done.
Yeah, and it's not even the line with the most ice time necessarily, too. They're not really playing like a first line ice time wise, but they're the line that's producing, and it seems like they have that specific role of we're going to be the ones who go out there and produce offensively. And it's just seems perfectly formulated to do that, right? It has a little bit of everything. I know you talked about Eberle and Wright, who's the one who goes to the corner and digs out pucks, who's the one who goes to the net front, and maybe wanting, more of a puck retriever on that line. I think at some point, like you said, we'll probably still see a switch there and McCann move to another line. But for the time being, I do love what Jared McCann is bringing there, and not just with his shot, but also some sneaky playmaking ability. In the last couple of games, being able to find open guys, that chemistry between him and Jordan Eberle, I think, is really building. And I know Canner joked after one of the games that Eberle was chirping him because he never passes him the puck. And I don't know, maybe that's getting into McCann's head a little bit. I think he's plenty selfless with the puck at times, right? But it's one of those things that maybe it's a little bit of a mindset shift as well. But they just look so dangerous, even in limited minutes, which it does make me wonder too. Do they start to get that bump in minutes? I would put him out in more situations personally.
And they're still not starting in the offensive zone. Like that's the other thing about this that's so crazy is that they're starting in the defensive zone all the time, and they're up there and they have these phenomenal point totals, the two of them, and they're contributing offensively so much together. I had talked about it. I think some of the playmaking is coming from Jared McCann has always been aggressive at getting up the ice and getting to the offensive zone and trying to attack with speed. And we've seen him do this countless times, right? Go back to any of his highlight reel footage from the first 3 seasons of the Kraken. And one of the things that'll stand out to you is that he's always attacking that way. Very rarely does he have a teammate going with him. And what this system that the Kraken are playing and the structure that the Kraken are playing with right now is giving him, it's finally giving him a teammate who's going up the ice with speed and attacking with him. And so I think that's also why we're starting to see some of that playmaking is honestly before he didn't have an option of playmaking and passing the puck to somebody. It just didn't exist because nobody else was there. Now there is somebody else there, and Jordan Eberle is definitely been the beneficiary of that. And then also credit to Ebbs for being able to play this style, right? I know we had questions about that potentially just because of his age factor and everything, showing that 34 is not actually that old, right? For a guy everyone's calling dad, right? It's not that bad. And going out there and then going net front and having the timing of that too, because it's not as simple as just skating in a straight line from the defensive zone directly to the net at the other end, right? You have to make choices each and every step along that way to make sure that you always have a passing lane open to you based on the puck carrier. And what I've been really impressed with Jordan Eberle as I've kind of gone back and watched some of these goals after the games has been when he decides to turn on the jets and when he doesn't, and the way he'll kind of go slower at the first half of entering the offensive zone, and then he really picks it up so that he can get behind the defense and get from the passing lane that would be put him ahead of the defense, and then really zoom up to that passing lane that'll get him just behind the defense. And by starting off a little slower, the defense doesn't back off as much, and then it gives him that window on the other side of them to kind of go and get there and be behind them and then get that net front goal. And so I think that's another interesting thing is you can just tell he's playing with pace, but you can still, even within that, kind of control what you're doing and really set yourself up for success. And Jordan Eberle has done a great job of that so far.
You can kind of lull a defenseman to sleep almost a little bit because he doesn't have the best high-end speed. He really doesn't, right. But he knows when to use that acceleration and to put himself in position to open up for a shot too, because his shot has just been on. this
Mhm.
season. And he has been a streaky shooter in the past, but we know he has that shooting talent. I don't. In some ways, it reminds me a little bit of Joe Pavelski.
Mhm.
Not the fastest player, but he's got that right hand shot that he kind of knows the places to be, where to open up to take it. And I'm seeing him score in ways that I remember Joe Pavelski scoring. Obviously, the tips are something else that Pavs brings, but the way that he's able to kind of work the zone, use his brain, and open himself up to use
Yeah.
that shot. It's something I haven't fully seen from him before under the Hackstall system, but I like the way he's doing it.
Yeah, it's been really impressive. And then Shane just kind of being the bully, the physical bully out there to provide them both with time and space. I just, like I said, it doesn't necessarily feel like the greatest uses of Shane's talents, but it is a talent that Shane has, and it has been on full display so far this season in allowing those guys, like I said, the time and space to be able to make these plays to each other and just get the Kraken on the board every game, feels like.
Yeah, and it's a thankless role too, because
It
he's
is.
not really putting this up the same production as a McCann or an Eberle, but he's doing all that tough work that's making it possible.
Exactly. So credit to Shane for playing that selfless style there and
Which is
taking
not
the
what you usually
punishment.
ask. Which is not what you usually ask a 20-year-old to do, right? That's
No.
not usually the 20-year-old's job on the line.
Right.
But again, he's very mature on the ice and playing like a vet there.
But much less a 20-year-old who, quite frankly, might have the highest offensive ceiling of anybody on this team once it's all said and done. it's just it's but you know what? It's working. So why fix it, right? It's everything's good.
Yeah.
One of the things though that people have been talking about, and I'm kind of certainly on board with this, and it is, I do think, and we kind of maybe started to see some of this in the third period of that last game. Dan working the lines a little bit to see if he can get something going, and that is the idea of, like you'd said, McCann maybe going off of that line there and going somewhere else, and a lot of people have been talking about it, and I'm on board with this, RJ, the idea of Jared McCann playing with Chandler Stevenson and kind of matching up Chandler Stevenson's passing ability that we have now seen, and as he's kind of gotten more and more comfortable with things going, matching that with Jared McCann's ability to finish. And I'm starting to feel like we might start seeing that sooner rather than later.
I think so. It wouldn't surprise me. And I mean, going back to our start of season mailbag when Chuck asked us what forward lines we would have if we were coach, I remember I put McCann with Stevenson because I thought that playmaking ability with the finisher like McCann would just gel really well. And so it's something I would like to see. I do think, though, as long as McCann, Eberle, and Wright are producing like this, I mean, like,
yeah,
if you're Dan, why would you break that up right now?
right.
Like you wouldn't until at least one game where it doesn't work, or at least you don't win. You keep it together for that amount of time. But when the time comes, because the time will come where you'll want to make a change for one reason or another, I would like to see that.
I think we're going to start seeing it in situations like that last game against Calgary, where a team is playing a way to take away what you want to do. It kind of takes away that line's ability to play the way they have been and have the success that they've had, which is, coming off of the rush, like we just talked about. And it puts you in a spot where, okay, we need to create something in the offensive zone now. Rather than being able to attack off the rush, we need to get in the offensive zone and then create something. And I think that's when you're going to start seeing more lineup shakeups the way we saw in that last game, and something that didn't really happen in the Blues game, but it happened in the Calgary game, and it felt like that was a good thing to try. And I think in those situations we might see a McCann with Stevenson, because that's a pairing that can create in the offensive zone the way unlike the way McCann and Eberle right now are finding success, which is almost exclusively off the rush.
And we have seen Dan resort to the line blender. Really, this week was the first time we really saw it in a game. Like in that Nashville game, so many different line combos and changes and whatnot, trying to make things work. So he's certainly not afraid to do stuff like that.
Right. And I think that's again, as you're still solidly coming together with your plan A, that's an easy plan B to have, right? It's not as comprehensive as it's going to need to be, but for right now, it's maybe enough. And I think that's what we'll maybe see. But Chandler Stevenson looking good so far here. I mean, we were asked the question last post game: are you willing to change your tune on the Stevenson signing as a whole? I don't think either of us are there. I don't know that we'll ever get there, just because of everything that goes into a long-term contract like that and what this team needed. But Chandler Stevenson's ability to create in the offensive zone when they do get stuck off of a rush has been impressive to see. And it is nice that they do have somebody who can do that.
Right, and there's certainly good elements of his game, right? It's not like, we're saying it's all bad, and he has his moments, and a clutch goal there on the 5-on-3. It was a nice shot, and he can produce at certain times, but I still look at the underlying numbers and still lowest on ice expected goals for percentage on the team, with a lot of offensive zone starts. So he's getting he's getting kind of easier deployment and not turning it into as much overall. So just little things like that. I'll want to see the underlying numbers get a little bit better. I will say, he's got 4 points in 6 games. That is a 54-point pace, which is, better than if he keeps that pace. It's a very small sample size, but still he's on pace I would take 54 points.
I would
on the season from him. So, he's on an okay pace, but I still haven't really changed my mind on him.
Yeah. And then we got to mention the face-offs. Oh man, it feels good to have somebody out there that you have like confidence in to take a face off. That's been nice.
True. And Dan talked about that, particularly in overtime too. They've had a couple overtime games, and he was asked about having Stevenson and Montour on the ice to start both those overtime periods. And the first area Dan went to was the face-offs, because it's so crucial, especially in overtime, to get those face-off wins. That's where a player like that can really come in handy. And it's not just overtime, but it's those key face-offs and key moments of a game. I think we've talked about this on various post-game live shows, right? Where maybe it's not the overall face-off percentage, but there's a handful of face-offs every game that are really, really important in those key moments. And that's where you can have a guy like Chandler Stevenson you can send out there and know that you're going to have a better chance than most of winning that draw. And that's just something the Kraken have never had before.
Right. Power plays being something that also feels important, because as I look at these games that the Kraken have been playing here, RJ, and all of the success and the finding different ways of winning, one of the things that has stood out to me is their special teams. And there is a very different look and feel to a power play for this group if they win that opening draw in the offensive zone and are able to set up the power play right from the start, versus if they lose that face-off, the puck gets cleared down the ice, and now they have to come back in, enter the zone, and then set up and all of that kind of stuff. Still feels like they're struggling with that. The zone entries themselves aren't an issue. Like, they've done a pretty good job of being able to enter the offensive zone. It just feels like they're struggling to get set up and kind of find any sort of cohesion in the offensive zone if they have to come in off the rush. Whereas when they start and they're able to win that first faceoff or win a faceoff off of, a goalie cover, that's when the power play has definitely looked better and looked its best. And I think when they've had their most success. And so having, again, a guy like a Chandler Stevenson, who's going to be on that power play unit, who you can kind of count on to more often than not win that important draw for your club, it's a big deal.
Yeah, definitely. And it's an area where, if we want to talk about special teams too, because I think that is an important topic to go over, not just the power play, but the penalty kill. Kraken power play at only 15%, 25th in the league. Like, there's definitely room for improvement there. But I think we can see exactly where that improvement is supposed to come, because when they do get set up, like you said, they look great. They're moving the puck around. They've got player movement. They've got puck movement. They have everything that you want from a power play. It's just it's rare that they actually get to be set up and have that time to work. So I think as soon as they figure out the entries or the face-offs get a little bit better, the power play is going to improve.
Right. So I think that's a big one. And hey, just to say it, right, I'm looking at some of the teams worse on the power play than the Kraken so far this season, RJ. Tampa, Toronto, Dallas, Edmonton. I'm just saying, maybe they're in good company with starting off a little slow on the power play.
Edmonton especially is very surprising, but it's a limited sample size, right? You have 4 teams here that you mentioned that are going to finish the season in the top probably 10 in the power play that are already looking that low. So it's a limited sample size. And so I think you have to take any of this stuff with a grain of salt, the power play especially. Yeah. But that said, I think the PK can be improved.
The PK is really the one area of this team that I look at and I think, okay, I'm starting to wonder if what you're doing is gonna work, right? Like the other stuff, it's okay. Give them the 20 games. Everybody's getting used to the system, especially on the power play. Like it feels like something that's just going to slowly get better over time as everybody gets more and more used to things. The PK, just the idea of what you're trying to do, I'm not really a fan of. And really what their idea right now is, RJ, is to play a very passive box power penalty kill that I just don't think is going to get it done. They just give up so much time and space to the opponents right now. I'm not surprised that you're only sitting at 75%.
And what makes it more perplexing too is it's not always the way that they practice. Dylan, I wanted to bring this up.
Yes.
The question that you asked in practice, and it is such a joy getting to sit with you at all these practices and morning skates. I love having you up here because you will turn to me and you'll ask a question like this. RJ, why does the PK play with gusto in practice but not games?
Yes.
And I know what you meant by that, right? In practice, they are more aggressive. They do put more pressure on the puck carrier. They do force decisions from a power play unit. And you know what? The practice reps, it looks a lot more successful. They have a lot more success that way. And so you always want to, what's the phrase? You want to practice the way that you play.
Right.
And it feels like this is one area where they're not doing that. And so that's why it's been a little bit puzzling to me.
Right.
And
now,
to you, clearly.
Now, what's crazy is that they're practicing, like normally you would say that and reference a team that is not putting in the practice habits, right, that you'd want, and then that's translating to the game. This is almost the opposite, which is they're practicing with the good habits, and then for whatever reason, come game time, those habits aren't there, and that's odd to say the least. I don't really know what it is, because if you look at some of their PKs, they'll start off kind of aggressive and in that like triangle +1 or more aggressive penalty kill style. It's just that as the PK goes on, they just kind of come back, and especially the forwards here, I'm talking about you. They'll just kind of slide back into the bottom half of the zone and just kind of sit there. And there's just nobody going up and pressuring the puck carrier. How many power play goals for other teams have we seen already this year where a guy has just been able to walk in and get a pretty high percentage look in an area where you don't normally see power plays be able to get a look, and it's just because nobody's really being aggressive, nobody's stepping up and trying to challenge them. I thought at first when they had gone on that road trip and we were seeing that in the Minnesota game and stuff, I thought, well, that's just them not having that kind of level of chemistry with each other out there yet, where they're just too worried about both players maybe stepping up and then leaving something. And as they learn each other's tendencies and habits, they'll work out that chemistry and it'll become kind of an unspoken thing that they'll be able to do out there. I'm starting to worry about that. And I'm starting not to think that that's the case, because we're just seeing it continuously and nobody's being like, okay, well, I guess I'll just step up because it's obvious my partner here is never going to, right? We're not really seeing that. And the one unit that I feel like does it more, and this is what's really odd and perplexing about it for me, is when you see Chandler Stevenson and Brandon Tanev out there together. That's the one that I could think of like 2 goals off the top of my head where I'm just like, why did neither of them step up and do this? And what's really weird about that is normally Tanev, very aggressive PKer. We've talked in the past about why he's really been the Kraken's best PK man before. He certainly was last year, it felt like. And it was because of how aggressive he is and how he forces other teams to not really get set. They have to move the puck. They have to, just keep it away from him rather than doing what they want to do. And this year, very reserved, which again makes me think that this is more so a coaching thing. And it's something that maybe at that level, you got to start changing the game plan a little bit.
Right, and take advantage of a player like Tanev that you have that can be aggressive. And I've noticed that too whenever that pair of forwards is out there. And it always feels refreshing when one of them changes and Yanni Gourde comes on and Gourde is pressuring a little bit more. He's doing a little bit more on the PK, and it feels like it's a lot more successful too. So I think you just need to figure it out between the two of them. And I think back to the Minnesota game, right, where the Wild, I think it was Matt Boldy scores that power play goal, where that one was a miscommunication. Stevenson, Tanev, they kind of moved into each other's spots. And so, okay, this still needs to be worked out here. But I think it hasn't gotten a ton better since then. You don't have anything egregious like that, but it does tell me that maybe some of this stuff still needs to be worked out, just whether it's from a communication perspective or just a coaching perspective.
Right. Well, you do in, was it the Flyers game? There was one. I'm going back to look at
Yeah, yeah.
those. I think it was on the Jamie Drysdale goal where it was like just kind of super passive. Nobody really
Right.
did
Face off win back
anything.
to the point.
Yeah,
Drysdale walks the point, and there's really
just
nobody out. He can kind of just hang on to it.
yeah, and he's got lanes to pass. He's got lanes to shoot. He just is able to kind of sit there and he similar to the Boldy goal. He's sitting there and he just kind of goes like you could see that there's a moment where he's at first thinking I've got to move this puck quick, and then he realizes, oh, nobody's on me actually, and you see them kind of take a step, take a second, and think, okay, what's my best play here? What's my best option? And then able to kind of go and execute it. And it's like that shouldn't happen.
Yeah, and I pulled up the play here again. I'm looking at the video now, and this is a perfect example too, because it's off the draw. Stevenson loses the draw, and Tanev goes out to kind of the left side to guard, gets the other point, but Drysdale walks over that way, and I think Tanev isn't sure. Okay, do I go get him now, or do I, kind of back off and let Stevenson get him? And Stevenson's not even moving his feet; he's just kind of gliding out toward Drysdale, and just clearly the two of them. I can't tell. I think Stevenson almost looks over at Tanev like, "You got him? I got him. What?"
Yeah.
Right. And it's just, it's not second nature to them yet.
Yeah. So I think that's something that kind of needs to be cleaned up and worked on. But if they're able to do that and you get this PK unit kind of back around and together, I think things are looking, better for special teams across the board for this group.
Yeah. And if you're going to be, because look, it hasn't really cost them games a ton yet. If you're going to be 4-2, it's almost maybe a better thing. Your special teams haven't driven that.
Yeah.
And you can see potential for positive regression there instead of negative regression. So, the kind of know where to go it up.
Well, that has been interesting. Like Jay Fresh kind of put out the first, graphs about where all the teams are in the league and stuff yesterday. And I don't think there's one where the Kraken are plus or minus beyond 3 from like 16th in like anything.
Right. And that was interesting to me. And I did see these like this morning, right, where talking about different, whether it's, goals scored above expected, goals saved above expected, all that stuff. They're right in the middle of the pack. You just look right in the middle of the graphic and you can find them because it's all right around 0, which that should tell you that there's not some, massive luck bender that's helping them out, right? That this is more or less sustainable. And I mean, I think that's good to see. That's kind of what you want to see at this point of the season if your team is doing well. But I do want to dig a little deeper into that and ask you about it, because I think really the question that a lot of people have for us this week, given the 4-2 start, is just, are the Kraken good? Like, are they actually good? Right. And there's bits of evidence, I think, on both sides. There are some things that are really encouraging to me. We've talked about a lot of those so far on this podcast. Yeah. There are also some things that give me pause. And I'm curious your take and kind of where you're at on this, because I feel cautiously optimistic, but there are some things that are giving me pause a little bit.
There are things, there's enough things that give me pause that I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, no, this is a team that's going to be up there towards the top, in the top 3-ish, 4-ish spots in the division all year long. I think we can just kind of say that this is definitively who they are now, because there is stuff like, there's the special teams questions, although we think that those are fixable things that should get resolved on their own. And then the more so worrying thing, even though at some point they will have a plan B, but it has been shown that like, if you play to take away what the Kraken want to do, the Kraken scoring dries up pretty fast, right? Like it's pretty fast how pretty easy to kind of take away a lot of their dangerous stuff there. And so that's something that the Kraken are going to need, because over the course of the year, more and more teams will just start entering games with the mindset of Calgary of, well, let's just not let them get up the ice quickly, and then they just aren't really going to do anything against us, right? And so that's something that the Kraken need to work on. That's something that they need to have. I think at the same time, though, I'm kind of impressed, RJ, at how well this team has been playing kind of true to where it feels like they are in the NHL, where they are absolutely beating the teams that they should be beating, and they're kind of struggling, but playing well against the teams that, seemingly on paper are better than them. And we're going to get more of that over the course of this week, some more tests for them, kind of playing up, so to speak. But right now, I wasn't expecting to be kind of so dead on when we were asked in that mailbag right before the season started of kind of like, what's a good first month for you? And we were kind of just talking like, just win the games you're supposed to win. You can drop the games you don't have to. I'm kind of shocked at how like close this team is following that right now.
It's made a lot of sense, like more sense than hockey usually makes, I guess. And that's why we're a little maybe surprised to see it. But that is, I guess, the essence of like the point that I was going to make is that what gives me pause is still the quality of competition. And given the teams that they've played against, the teams that they've beaten, and particularly the goaltending as well. I think Fleury had a bad game in the Minnesota win. Saros was just completely off in the Nashville win. We talked about that plenty during the live commentary. Yeah. He's been off all year. Yeah, Nashville, I mean, right now might be one of the worst teams in the NHL just based on how they're playing. They just haven't had it come together. And then Philadelphia, where you have, Ivan Fedotov in net, who for my money is the worst goalie in the NHL right now. And he sort of played like it in that one. And so I do wonder, or I certainly before the Calgary game was wondering, okay, how much of their success is based on playing some really awful goaltending? And is that going to be sustainable or something they can continue to build off of? But after that Calgary win, I think I'm at this point where I just think, look, they're still that playoff bubble level team. But in order to make it, in order to be on the right side of that bubble, if you can just take care of the games against teams you should beat, that's enough. The way the NHL is set up right now, half the teams make the playoffs. You don't even have to be above average to make the playoffs. It's actually one of the easier leagues to do it, right? You just have to be average or, 1 point better than average, whatever it is. You can make the playoffs. And the Kraken certainly seem to be trending in that direction and maybe even potentially better. I think the next week will show us just how high that ceiling is. But if they can just take care of these teams that they should beat, that's going to be enough to earn your way into the dance. And then, as Ron Francis loves to say, once you're in, anything can happen. We saw it a couple of years ago. Once you're in, anything can happen. And that's really just all they need to get to. I do worry about the better opponents and that sort of thing, like Colorado especially. The Kraken haven't played against a team with some bona fide superstars like that. I mean, Dallas, you could maybe argue, but Dallas was a loss. So it'll be the next level of test for them. And so I'm really interested to see how this next week goes.
Yeah, I think this next week is going to give us a better indication of where they fit into the larger NHL landscape. I think right now we have a good feel of what their identity is, what they do well, what they're still working on, what they're still struggling with and need to get better at. This will be our first time to kind of to be able to place them in the NHL as a whole and kind of say, okay, we know what the Kraken are. What does that mean? and I think this week is definitely going to kind of give us that as you get the game against Colorado. You also get a game against an undefeated Winnipeg team. That's going
to be a challenge.
That's going to be a challenge. That's going to be a big one. So I think that's going to be interesting. And then Carolina after that. So it's going to be fun. I'm excited for it though. RJ, I last year I would not have been excited to watch this team play against those three teams. I think that would have been like oh wow, that's our week. All right, there we go. But this time around, like even if two of these games end up losses, I think that they're still going to be good games. The Kraken are going to do some good things in them, and we're gonna find things to root for and cheer for and have fun with, and that's just a really positive thing. And I think the team is feeling that way too.
Yeah, and that's all we were asking for at the end of last year too. I think that's all we wanted was competitive games, win or loss, but a good hard fought game and a challenge, right?
Yep.
And we're certainly getting that this early in the season. I think that's something to just take a step back and celebrate for a little bit.
Exactly. So hope everybody enjoys this week's slate of games, even though they're going to be difficult. So far, it's been a fun homestand. I think everybody's been having a good time. If you've been going to the games, these should be good ones as well to go to. I want to thank everybody for listening. I want to thank Queen Anne Beer Hall for sponsoring podcast as they always do. If you listen to this right away, make sure to head out to Queen Anne Beer Hall, watch the Monday night games for the NFL tonight. That should be a lot of fun. And then definitely hope to see as many of you as possible on Wednesday over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey for that prospect chat. I'm really looking forward to being able to talk about these guys for the first time this season with some games under their belt. So should be a lot of fun. Thanks everybody for listening, and we will see you all next time.
Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons.
Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.